So with training, there's a whole thing called periodization, where you kind of ramp up your training, back off, ramp up your training, back off, and train your body so you're at peak performance right at the time of the event you're doing.
The science of sports is to understand, how do I peak at the right time? And that requires huge loads at certain points, but by the time we get to Olympics, they should be tapering off.
Well, they're definitely working with a strength coach very closely, nutritionist, sports psychologist, but it really is based off of their strength and conditioning program, their nutrition, their volume of training. It all kind of tapers to that one event.
That we have everything monitored from workout training schedules that can be monitored, put on a computer, looking at see what activity and intensity levels you're working at, as well as sleep patterns, recovery rates, monitoring nutrition, monitoring workloads.
Their whole program for the whole, leading up to the game starts a year before, if not sometimes several years before. The reality is some of these athletes have a quadrennial training plan. They started in literally 2012 planning, okay, what do I need to do to peak in August 2016. But it comes back to their coach, their training plan for that athlete so that they can peak at the right time. There's a fair amount of science behind coaching, but there's some art too. At the end of the day, probably a little bit of luck as well.
In triathlon, they're training in 3 sports. So that balancing act between training enough to be hitting your peak in 3 different sports at the same time is definitely trickier probably than in many other disciplines. So between their own experience guiding that, as well as more sophisticated measures that, such as lab work or lactate levels or some of the things that are monitored more in a sports science environment, all those combined should help people figure out the way to be performing best on the day that they compete in the Olympics.